I'm going to be talking to Rachel Notley, who's the former Premier of Alberta and the leader of the Alberta NDP, leader of Alberta's official opposition, about an economic policy statement that she released back in mid-December. It's got all kinds of interesting stuff in it. So welcome to the interview, Rachel.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
Now, look, let's start off with what I think is probably the most controversial of the 5 points that are in the policy, and that is the repeal of the Sovereignty Act. This has been hugely controversial. You make the point in the statement that uncertainty and instability affects Alberta's ability to attract investment. What did you mean by that?
Well, pretty much what we said in that, we've got, an act which I would argue runs counter to what most legal experts say is within the authority of the provincial government. And in so doing, and then for a number of reasons, not the least of which, of course, is its complete disregard for the rights of Indigenous people. But in so doing, what it does is it creates this sense for investors that they can't count on the rule of law. They can't count on a government that understands the law, period, nor can they count on the laws that are in place at this time that would be driving some of their investment decisions. And so that creates a huge level of uncertainty around final investment decisions on big projects, which often then have consequences for other projects, and it goes on. And so it really does create a tremendous amount of uncertainty in the province, one that relies in large part on attracting investment from out of the province. And it's just bad news for Alberta working people.
This morning, I interviewed Frank Graves from Ecos Research, a polling company, and he said that that Canadian politics has become polarized and dark, and it's because of radicalized conservatives like Danielle Smith. He mentioned her by name, and about 25% of Canadians now sort of fall into the supporters of the freedom movement, for example. And Alberta, unfortunately, has the largest percentage of any Canadian province. And you've been in politics a long time. What's it like? How have things changed in the last few years? And what's it like trying to do, rational, evidence-based, policy-based politics in this new environment?
Well, I can definitely say it's frustrating. It is something that we became very conscious of, I think, even before other folks started talking about it, almost as soon as the election was over in 2019, a little bit leading up to it, but even more so afterwards. And in that, I've honestly never seen a group of elected representatives who are as comfortably casual with the truth as a number of folks who are leading within the UCP. So this didn't actually start with Danielle Smith. It actually, for sure, it was, Jason Kenney and several of his ministers are quite comfortable with saying things that are not true, both in the legislature as well as outside. And so that really undermines the quality of the conversation. And I think it's a continuation of a dynamic that we've seen develop in the US, and it's really migrated into Alberta politics. That whole that whole theme and observation, of course, was dialed up considerably with first the convoy and the freedom trucker thing and the anti-vaxxers, and then their decision to get behind Danielle Smith, who herself just in the last few weeks has demonstrated a profound disregard for the need to tell the truth at any given time. And combined with a a disturbing level of misunderstanding around the very issues that she should be talking about. So it is hard, and it's particularly hard in Alberta because we are a province that has some complicated issues to deal with. And I think we have a lot of opportunity to do things in a way that's going to support working people, that's going to support good paying industrial jobs long into the future, not fewer, but more. I think there's lots of good opportunities, but they are complicated problems. And, I come from a completely different background. I come from a labor relations background where what you do is you dig really deep into all the minutia of the things that are on the table, and then you hammer out a deal. And it's one of those things where, if you leave the table and both sides are unhappy, you think you probably ended up with the best resolution, right? And I've got a lot of experience in my background of working through things that on the face at the very beginning seem unresolvable, but then they become quite resolvable and you get real progress. And we have completely moved away from that level of civil discourse in Alberta right now, but I am a little worried about the trend in some other parts of the country as well.
Now, a good example of the kind of issue that you're talking about is the controversy that broke out last week around the federal just transition legislation. And Premier Smith was making all sorts of demands of the federal government, making claims that they're basically trying to shut down Alberta's oil and gas industry, and where the government has said the Prime Minister said that's not true, and so on. But you came out and had what I thought, to be honest, it was a bit of an odd response in that I know you criticized Smith for her side of it, but I thought you would come out more in favor of or in defense of a just transition approach.
Well, listen, I'm not, I guess, first of all, let's just start with the fact that I think we all can agree that those are very loaded terms, and working people all across this country have experiences with those kinds of terms that have been devastating for their lives and for the lives of their family, and we just had the Auditor General's report come out federally a couple of weeks ago talking about the Newfoundland fishery, for instance, as an example of how there really wasn't that kind of thing, and coal is another example, and so for good reason people get very, very concerned about those things. Now, we're in an awkward position because we have, as we were just talking about before, we have not only Danielle Smith's characterization of what's happening federally and the characterization of the documents that came out last week, which are, frankly, amount to misinformation. You also have a number of otherwise respectable members of the media also torquing those documents and describing them in ways that are not accurate. So I'm not here to in any way, shape, or form support those characterizations. However, having gotten hold of the document and having read through it ourselves, what we did see were some worrisome descriptions and some worrisome plans that actually were new to me and made me think, oh my goodness, they are actually beavering away on something that's pretty darn big over in Ottawa. And there's a whole bunch of Albertans who are not aware of the scope of this. And unfortunately, because of the environment that we just were talking about, Markham, we are not in a position to make sure that Albertans are at the table right now with a strong voice that's going to make sure that their industrial jobs are protected and grown going forward. And so in the face of that, the specter of having these kinds of conversations and decisions being made in Ottawa while Albertans are wrapped up in what is effectively an election campaign pretty much now, that's not acceptable. That's not how we do business in Canada, and Albertans deserve to be heard and to drive this conversation, not hear about it after the fact.
Final question on this, because I want to wrap it up and move on to other points in your economic plan. It seems like the ability to have a civilized, rational conversation about an issue, about policy, it's not it's changed so much in the last 3 or 4 years that when an issue like this comes up that has some complexity to it, it almost becomes, it's just a matter of, outrageous lies from the premier. And I must say, a number of media people, including myself, have called them lies, because that's exactly what they are. So let me be very frank about that. But once the premier and her ministers and others start going down that path, then rational discourse is off the table. And so does that mean you as a politician have to kind of back up and say, hang on a second, let's either simplify the issue or take it off the table?
Well, I think, let's be clear. I mean, just going back to what I just said, I mean, we have an issue with respect to, the quality of discourse in politics in Alberta in general. But I think in any province, any country, the closer you get to an election, the less nuanced the conversation becomes. And that's not just Alberta, that's everywhere. And it's not just Canada, that's everywhere. And so to try and be talking about something as big as this, and to have so many decision points line up in Ottawa, literally a month or 2 months before Albertans go to the polls, that timing is just, I mean, it's not timing that was considered with Albertans in mind, quite honestly. And it's not Ottawa's fault that the UCP government has refused to competently come to the table and stand up for Albertans. However, that doesn't let them off the hook for the timing of this situation now, I'm afraid. And so I believe strongly that there is a path to a good outcome here, but I believe that Albertans need a very strong, informed, thoughtful, fact-based, evidence-based set of voices at the table led by their government, and they don't have that right now.
Well, let's move on to number 2, and that is your petroleum petrochemicals diversification credit. Now, you brought this in 2018, and it was quite successful. And so tell us about what your plans are for the next, if you were government, what else would you do to it?
Well, so, we brought it in and we really had a chance to we were very careful at the very early onset of it. And of course, it was happening at a time when the price of oil was around $25 a barrel. So, investment everywhere was kind of like holding up. So it took a bit longer to get it out the door. But of course, the first example of it was IPL. And then we had another successful one up in Grand Prairie. And it's very clear that these incentives have been successful at bringing in value add processes to Alberta that wouldn't otherwise have been here, that have made, in some cases, Alberta the Canadian, and in some place, and I think only one of 2 places in all of North America with some of this feedstock. And it gives us, of course, as a result of that, an opportunity to do all this incremental manufacturing and investment around it, which is exactly the kind of sort of industrial strategy that we've been talking about trying to establish in Alberta for decades and decades and decades on top of this wonderful natural resource that we all benefit from. So the key is, now that we're starting to see what it can look like, and we've had more projects approved, is to simply turn up the dial and offer more opportunities in different spin-offs of that, and to create more jobs, more good paying industrial jobs that are reliable and predictable around the province.
Now, you mentioned industrial strategy and policy, and that is, modern version of that is all the buzz these days in policy circles. And I assume, is it safe to assume that taking Alberta's hydrocarbons, its oil and gas and its bitumen from the oil sands, and adding more value to it, maybe moving it into making products with it instead of sending it off to refineries to turn into fuel, is that behind also your future tax credit, which is the third point in your economic plan?
Those are absolutely the kind of things that we want to see covered by that Alberta's Future Tax Credit. Bitumen beyond combustion. We have a paper specifically on BBC at our Alberta's Future website, or our project, albertasfuture.ca. So that's one example. It's not the only example. There's lots of different projects that would be eligible for that tax credit. But the idea is, moving into spaces to both both add value and also reduce emissions. That's what that credit is for sure.
Okay, that's one tax credit. The folks who are in this policy space talk about a more active role for government, and there have been groups in Alberta that have suggested maybe more of a Premier Peter Lougheed kind of approach where government takes equity, government provides leadership. Is that what you have in mind?
I think that, going forward, like we don't have any equity taking components in the strategy that we rolled out in December, but I think going forward, that is a mechanism that we'll want to take a look at pretty quickly as soon as we get into government, because I think, as you rightly identified, there is opportunity there, and we've seen more and more economists around the world start talking about the benefits of those kinds of models, and so I think there is. So we will definitely be looking at that in more detail, because I think there is opportunity there for taxpayers, right? And there we're not talking about the working folks who get the benefit of this, but actual Alberta taxpayers. So I think we need to be creative about this. The Alberta's Future Project as a whole, one of the key principles that we rolled out when we first rolled out Alberta's Future.ca 2.5 years ago is, let us remember, Alberta is a small economic player in a very large international market. We have tremendous benefits at our disposal. We have a very well-educated population. We have a young population. We have amazing natural resources, and we have a skill level which is kind of unique relative to other places. But we're still small, and so we have to be strategic. And we need to bring government and industry and the private sector, as well as post-secondary, together to be as strategic as we can in terms of how we position ourselves for growth. And so there's a lot of different models for how we do that.
Now that leads me to a related question. And when you were you were elected to government in 2015, and one of the things I thought you did quite well, and we're on Energy Media's on record many times supporting that approach, is you didn't have a really well developed election platform around energy and climate, but then you appointed commissions or advisory groups. There was the Leach Group on climate, and there was the EDAC, the Energy Diversification Advisory Committee. And is that how you plan to move forward should you be elected in May?
Yes, I think we will do that in certain priority areas. One of the things that I've learned about governance is that, you've got folks in the public service who work really hard keeping the trains running on time. And quite honestly, some of those folks have been already stressed and pushed to quite extreme ends, given sort of some of the things that Albertans and the public service have been confronted with over the last 4 years. But when you have a particular project that you want to drive, you need to sometimes you need to bring in fresh legs. You need to bring in people with specific expertise, and you need to give them very short timelines in order to and give them the benefit of sort of a political support and drive, while at the same time ensuring you've got expertise and oversight and peer review and transparency, of course. But that is, in our experience, the projects that we were able to drive came from that kind of extra add.
Well, let's talk about number 4, which is consult on expanding Aboriginal Alberta Indigenous Opportunities Corporation.
Yeah.
And I think everybody's in agreement that anything to do with natural resources has to include Indigenous peoples. And once you've gone out and consulted with them, any idea of where you might like if you became formed government, where you might like to go with this?
Well, again, I don't want to prejudge, because that would sort of suggest that the consultation was a little empty, but certainly part of what made us develop this piece came from Indigenous leaders, First Nations, Treaty people themselves, who said, listen, AIC is a good idea in principle, but we've now found that it's very restrictive. Many of us are not included in it. We're not eligible for it. It's very restrictive in the type of investment that we can do, all that kind of stuff. And so, yes, our view is to go and hear from folks about how it could be changed to ensure that there's more opportunity for smaller projects, more diverse projects, while at the same time, of course, preserving the integrity of the program and preserving, the security of taxpayers. But I think there's room to open it up a lot, and I think we need to be more responsive to the initiatives of treaty people rather than telling them what projects they should be investing in.
Let's go. We'll wrap this up with the last point, which is performance, pass, fast pass, and navigators. What do you mean by that?
So basically, we do a lot of work. Governments, see, here I am. Governments do a lot of work in terms of regulatory approval. It's important work. It is absolutely important work. But sometimes you can have project proponents who have a long history of very high quality work, who follow the rules, who have tremendous expertise, and those folks get moved to the back of the line behind another proponent that no one's ever heard of, where they're starting from scratch in terms of not only walking them through the regulatory requirements, but building the relationships and that kind of thing. So the idea here is to essentially allow those folks with a strong record of meeting the requirements, paying their taxes, paying their fines if the fines come up, and following the rules of moving them along faster, because they know it. That's the idea. And it's in a whole bunch of different sectors. And, one of the things that everyone, I think, in business in particular have been struggling with is that, like, I think regulatory oversight is tremendously important, and I'm not interested in removing standards. But at the same time, you need to make sure that you have skilled people and an adequate number of people who are overseeing those regulatory standards. Because if you don't, if what you do is you keep cutting and cutting and cutting staff, well, then you've got one poor officer who can't see their desk because of the stacks of applications that have literally been sitting on it for years, and you are slowing down economic activity. And so we need to be able to move faster, and we need to be doing it a bit smarter. And so that's what that's about. Now, obviously, someone breaches and you're still checking all that kind of stuff, then they lose that privilege. But the idea is to bring on more capacity and then to be able to prioritize those who have a strong record.
One final question on that point. When you announced this on this particular issue, I had some pushback from landowners who are dealing with oil and gas companies and really frustrated. But basically, they say they're being steamrolled, and others who are saying that a lot of the companies are ignoring regulations. There's accusations of the AER being captured. Do you have any plans to revisit how the oil and gas industry is being regulated? Just besides hiring more people to do it more efficiently.
Well, there is that, but then, I absolutely understand the issues around surface rights and some of the legitimate issues that landowners are experiencing. And as far as I'm concerned, where there's unresolved issues around that, then the fast pass wouldn't apply. I mean, that's all there is to it. I mean, I have a long history of meeting with landowners who struggle with of having an effective surface rights administration, as well as ensuring that that's linked up to what's going on with the AER, and that is, we are in no way, shape, or form proposing that we somehow bypass that. Quite the opposite. That's a piece that needs to be fixed.
Well, Rachel, thank you very much for this. Really appreciate it.
All right. Thank you.